My name is Father Robert Guessetto, an Augustinian presently working at the National Shrine of St. Rita in Philadelphia, and I've been there for 7 years now. I grew up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and that has a particular relevance to our conversation because it has been a stronghold of our Augustinian presence beginning in 1848. And so there was a time when we had 5 very active parishes there, and I grew up in one of them, Holy Rosary Parish. I went to the Catholic school there and was an altar server, and that certainly had a large part to play in nourishing what became my vocation to join the Augustinian order. And after my novitiate at upstate New York and New Hamburg, I came down here to Villanova to do studies in philosophy and my undergraduate work, then on to Washington for theology. And in my early years, I had served 18 years in parish work at St. Mary's in Lawrence, bringing me back to my hometown, although not my home parish, and then to Philadelphia here, to our Mother of Consolation in Chestnut Hill. And then I began what turned out to be, after a time at Our Lady of Mother of Consolation in Chestnut Hill, about 18 years, 20 years in formation ministry. I was in Washington for some years and then in Rome for 13 years, working with our young Augustinians coming from around the world. And after that time, and 2 years in Chicago, I was able to return to what was more like parish and pastoral ministry at the shrine at St. Rita's, where I am now.
And I'm Father Michael DiGregorio. I'm a native of Staten Island, New York, a graduate of our former high school there, Augustinian Academy. And after graduating from high school, I entered the order, was professed in 1966 and ordained in 1973. I spent about 30 years in parish ministry and then a number of years in formation work as well. I've also had the opportunity to work as administrative work, I'd say, both in Rome and here in the province. I served as Vicar General for 6 years and for Prior Provincial for 8 years. And now I live here at St. Thomas of Villanova Monastery in what people like to call retirement. But I try to keep my life a little bit busy as best I can in things that entertain me and occupy my interest as a friar.
Well, Michael, we've been very much engaged in excitement of our 150th anniversary since last December, and we're looking forward to its celebration and our observance of these years as a province. But before that, you had begun work on an essay on Father Thomas Galbury, one of our early Augustinians, and indeed the first provincial after we became a province. And I'm just curious, what had inspired you to redo the work on Father Galbury as part of your interest in the history of the province?
Yeah, well, I think I entered it almost by accident. I have been interested for a long time in looking into the lives of some of the friars of the province. I think there are many wonderful stories about our individuals, what they've done, what they've accomplished. And Father Galbury was someone who, I don't remember exactly why, but his career kind of piqued my interest. And I started to do some research into his life. And as I was doing that, came to discover that the provincial chapter that was held 150 years ago was coming upon an anniversary year. And so I decided, well, maybe this is an opportunity to kind of bring Father Galbury a little bit more into relief in the province. His name certainly is well known in the province, but I don't know that his story was very well known. So I started to do some research in the archives, as well as in other areas that provided some kind of information on his life, which was available online through newspapers and Ancestry.com and tried to put all of that together, and I found that there was a great deal of material that I was able to draw together and presents a sketch of his life. And happily, it all happened as we were preparing for the celebration of this anniversary of the first provincial chapter. So that's how it really came about, almost by accident, but I think in a certain way, I'd say maybe providentially.
Yes, it seems to be, and happily for us too,
Yeah.
because as we began to hear that we were approaching this anniversary, to be able to read that history of yours, and indeed, he was a remarkable man. His generosity of spirit, his willingness to travel when necessary, his gifts in leadership, and his early years in building churches and all. So it was just wonderful to read that history. And then the pride that we have in the fact that he was called to be a bishop, which was difficult in the sense of losing him from the province, but then a beautiful gift to the church, although short-lived because of his early death.
Right, yes.
But it's a beautiful story of a man of faith and an Augustinian dedicated to the church. And I think you mentioned in the work that incredible fact for us that it was 75 years that we were here before we really got strongly established. And we had gone through many years with very low numbers. And also in our earliest years after Father Carr came, or actually even before Father Carr, there were some Augustinians in the United States, but they weren't connected with this hope that Father Carr brought, Father Matthew, and being able to begin the work towards the province. But they were working outside, in a sense, the Augustinian world and mission. What was happening at that time?
Well, I think our presence was really a response to the missionary effort that was underway through the initiative of Bishop Carroll, who was seeking for priests in various places to come to the United States and to help evangelize. And so, yes, we had individuals like Robert Brown, Philip Laracy, and even the first two, Father Carr and who was the other one?
Rossiter.
Father Rossiter, who came over really to do missionary work. Father Carr also, as he volunteered for this mission, was given the charge to establish the order as well in the United States. So he was the one who really was commissioned by the Prior General to see if it were possible to establish Augustinian presence in a lasting way here in this new land of ours. The others, Robert Brown and Philip Laracy, were pretty much missionaries working in areas where the bishop had assigned them, only tangentially related to the work that Father Carr and Father Rossiter were doing. Yeah, so that's how it really began. And I think that kind of frames the way in which the province itself has developed out of this missionary root that is very much part of our identity. Yeah,
clearly. And it's interesting, too, that at that time, the United States only had the one bishop, Bishop Carroll in Maryland. And so the work of priests were some diocesan priests. There were some Jesuits, as Bishop Carroll was. And so we were working close with diocesan men and other priests, serving where we were needed. And in terms of our pride at being the fourth church that was established here in Philadelphia, it's also fascinating to know that Father Carr and Father Rossiter had been pastors of the first two churches, St. Mary's and St. Joseph's in Philadelphia.
Yeah, there was not a very well-defined demarcation of this is yours, this is ours. The priests went where they were needed. So Father Carr quickly became the Vicar General under Bishop Carroll, became pastor of what's now the Jesuit Church, before he began work on establishing our own Church of St. Augustine's in Old City. So yes, you're very correct in saying that these individuals were at the service of the bishop. The bishop was very free to be able to send them where they were most needed, to be able to attend to the people where the requirements that the people had really invited their participation in their ministry. But Father Carr, happily, always from the very start had this ideal that, yes, while I'm doing this work for the bishop, I'm also empowered by the Prior General to see if we could set our own roots here in the country. And so very early on, he began the work of building a foundation which became St. Augustine's in Old City.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and his vision for that first church was pretty grand, because it was a large structure. It was beautifully built, and then it was able to be completed. Was it by Father James O'Donnell that partly finished the building of St. Augustine's?
Well, Father Hurley, who was the immediate successor to Father Carr, for as long as Father Hurley remained, until his death.
And that's a very sobering thought, too, because there was a time after Father Carr's death that Father Hurley was the only Augustinian.
Yeah, he left all by himself here. And he was the lone friar in the country for a few years until some other recruits came from Ireland to be able to assist him. And then some native vocations began to emerge as well. Yeah. So you can imagine the difficulty that was. He joined the order in order to be a religious, and he worked hard, Father Hurley, really with the intention of trying to invite native individuals to join the order. Even he had this ambition of trying to bring some diocesan priests into the religious community. That did not meet with a great deal of success, however. Yeah.
And then a big step forward was when Father Moriarty came. He had been trained in Europe and came to the United States. And there was a Father Kyle here at that time as well from Ireland. And that's an interesting note, too, that at the beginning, some of these initiatives were from the Irish provincial, when their men were asking to come over and serve here, giving that permission, and then in connection with the propagation of the faith in Rome, that kind of also helped to allow this to happen. But when Father Moriarty came, very shortly after he was here, that significant event of he and Father Kyle purchasing the Rudolph property here at Villanova. And with the foresight of eventually starting a college. And, at the very beginnings, with so few Augustinians here, the property was bought, and it was in 41, right? 1841.
41 they purchased it, yes.
And then by 1843, the college started.
Yeah, I think they saw this really as an opportunity to bring to a certain level of completion the ideal that Father Carr had and the commission that he had been given to establish the order. That as long as they were going to be at St. Augustine's in the city, their vision was rather limited. Being able to come here out to what was then the suburbs very much, and to establish a community life which would not have been possible at St. Augustine's, given the limitations of the city. This was really the laying of the foundation for the religious inspiration that they had, and quickly became identified with the opportunity to bring education into the ministry that the Augustinians were trying to carry on here in this country.
Yes, yeah. It's a remarkable beginning. And Father Moriarty had that sense of wanting to contribute to the educational mission of the Augustinians. And from here, too, was the opportunity with the needs that there were to keep this property going and all, that There was a farm here, that's what it was originally, and men were drawn knowing that we needed farmers and all, and it was the beginning of the growth of brothers joining. That was significant because without the demands of pastoral ministry, their attention was to their community life, which Father Moriarty tried to instill from the beginning. And then the number of brothers were growing as well with the services they were able to provide here. And then another character that's very significant here is Father O'Dwyer, the first president of Villanova. Was he called a president?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. A young man who had great capacity, great ability, who was given the responsibility for leadership in terms of the education here. And very well regarded as an individual. He was being considered at the time of his death, he died very young, to become the first bishop of the community. Didn't happen because of his untimely death. But he did an important work in laying the foundation for the college here. Yeah. Even though at times it had to be interrupted. Certainly it was interrupted when Old St. Augustine's was burnt down.
The Civil War also was a factor.
The Civil War was another moment in which the college experienced great difficulty and classes had to be suspended for several years. But always was able to recoup. And I think that's, as we're speaking about this now, it just strikes me as an interesting part of our story. The situation of Father Hurley being all by himself, or the college having to close its doors for a while. But the resilience somehow of the spirit that we need to continually move forward. It was never looked at as this is the end. It might be a termination for a moment, a pause in our activity, but certainly not the final moment. And I think that's a vision of hope, and that can continue to be something that we carry with us as we go forward.
Yes, yeah. And as we read our history, it can be the encouragement it gives us not to get discouraged or lose hope when we see things diminishing. And it's a fascinating comparison also with what was happening in Europe at the time we were beginning. Europe was struggling. Our Augustinians were being diminished greatly because of the political situation in Europe, the decline of provinces, and yet we saw that Europe recovered from that as well, and that becomes another lesson for us to trust in the Lord working through all these historical and political situations, but preserving the work of the Church and the order. And then shortly after that, in the late 40s, 1840s, is when we started to grow. In the middle of that 19th century, there was numbers of men coming to join us. It allowed us to move into upstate New York. First of all, into Lawrence, right? And so Father James O'Donnell beginning St. Mary's. A few years later, being given 2 other parishes, and we know how that eventually grew. And then shortly after that, the work in upstate New York that started small, but then grew to a number of towns, with Father Galbury being very significant in that growth.
Right. Yeah, the ability to spread out and to respond to the invitations that were being offered by bishops to go to new places and to do new works. And I think that there was always a willingness and a desire to move out, to move in new directions. And today we're in a little bit of a different situation where unfortunately we've had to move back a bit and kind of return to some of the bishops, some of the works that had been entrusted to us. But perhaps with this sign of hope, looking at our history and the way in which Providence has led us in the past, to be able to look at this also as perhaps just a moment in history that doesn't spell something completely negative, but perhaps offers us a new way of looking at what our reality is and what different needs are that invite us in different ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much. And reading the stories of these men, knowing that history, that gives us hope, but also to see their perseverance, their hard work, their willingness to travel. And we had been reading that they wouldn't think twice about traveling 100 miles to say Mass or 40, 50 miles. And they were available for the work of the church and excited about that work. And so that's the value, too, of celebrating this 150th anniversary, that we're kind of motivated to read these histories and to see how it can be inspiring for the work we're doing today.
Sure.
To find that same energy and perseverance.
Yeah. I think the anniversary kind of offers us an opportunity to really see a wider context to whatever it is we're about. We live from day to day. We do our work. We don't maybe reflect too much upon its consequences for the future. But it's only when you look kind of back at history and you can see a picture developing of how one event or one personality, one individual impacts another and becomes something of significance in terms of a long view of what is being accomplished, what's being lived. So the context is really important, and I think it's something that becomes a gift also to motivate us forward, to be able to appreciate what we're about, what we're doing as even bigger than we're able, through our own limited perspective, to see at any moment of time. Yeah.
Yes. There's a sense, too, of appreciating that generosity of spirit and that missionary zeal that's reflected in the way early on our men moved out to Chicago and then some years later out to California, and those eventually became their own provinces. And they carried the spirit of the original founders into a wider area of the United States, both being strong provinces as well today. Reading the story of these men and coming to appreciate them, I think one natural thing that begins to happen is you find yourself drawn to the personality or the gifts or the spirituality of some of the men. Is there one in our early history that you feel more drawn to and kind of inspired by his life?
Yeah. Well, there are several, I'd say. And certainly over the course of the province's history, as I look at different individual lives, there are a number of them that really inspire me and about whom I'd like to know more and perhaps do more research on. But certainly Galbury himself is someone who really stands out for me. The more I've read about him and looked into his life, I've really been inspired by his sense of simplicity, his humility, his sense of direction. He knew what he was about. He had no pretenses about his own accomplishments, but I think he just simply tried to be a good friar, a good priest, to do what he was being asked to do, not thinking too much about what would come next, but simply trying to do from day to day what he was being asked to do for the good of the order and for the good of the church. I think he was really a very holy man, and I wonder if maybe we missed the boat in not really looking at his life more seriously in the context of his time. Now a lot of time has passed by, and perhaps looking back, things become a little bit simpler, maybe even a little bit more romantic. But I really see him as someone who made a tremendous difference in the life of the province. And obviously, he made a difference also in his role as Bishop of Hartford. As people have said, and have written. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you're speaking about Father Galbury, I'm thinking of one of the early men that kind of inspired me, and it was when Villanova, they were trying to get Villanova started as a college and sought help from Europe to bring some men, and one of them that came, Pacifico Neno, from Italy, and it just was impressive to hear a man coming from another country, having to learn another language, and seemingly quickly getting inserted into the life of the community here and beginning to teach here and giving responsibilities for the formation of the young, at that time, postulants. I think he was directing for a while, but teaching. But also reading through, it just strikes me as also a very prayerful man and a man of faith. What was especially moving was when he was describing Father Galbury after his death, when he wrote to the Prior General to relay the sad news of his sickness and death, and was describing the kind of man Father Galbury was. And you could just see out of that his own sensitivity and what he considered very important. So he strikes me as one of our heroes, one of our spiritual and Augustinian heroes. The way, too, that he was prepared to take on leadership, becoming the second provincial of the province, and then being called to Rome to help guide the order through a difficult time, and first as commissary general and then as prior general. But I think he strikes me as a man strongly Augustinian, dedicated to education, desirous of instructing young people in the ways of the faith, and also his commitment to community life that came through with his years here.
Yeah, and the curious thing is that they were very good friends, the two of them. Pacifico Neno became the first counselor to Thomas Galbury when he was elected provincial. And as you say, he succeeded him when Father Galbury was made Bishop of Hartford. And so there was something, some kind of an affinity between these two individuals. Unfortunately, both of them died very young. They both died in office while they were doing very important work, and have left a legacy that we're still enjoying because of what they were able to sow.
Yes.
Yeah. So two of many lives that are inspirations, I think, for us and could be for many, many other people as well in the order.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the province has grown tremendously over the years with so many other ministries and apostolates. And it's be curious just to wonder how might Father Galbury look upon us, seeing what has happened, what gifts we've been given by the Lord, or what we've accomplished in the years since, now we're looking 150 years back.
Mm. Yeah, curious question. I think just, looking at his personality, the kind of individual he was, and how he seemed to respond to things that were happening in his own day, I think he would just take it as kind of a matter of fact. Well, this is what happens. God's providence kind of leads and directs us. So I don't think he'd be either surprised or discouraged by anything that is. I think he would kind of take it as a matter of, this is life, and this is how life goes, and you do the best you can with it at any moment.
And that we're all meant to be servants of the Lord's work and the growth of the church, and in the part that we play as an order.
Right, exactly.
In the ministry of the church.
Yeah.